Felix the Fast Tractor Helps to Find Ben by Catherine Cannon. Felix the Fast Tractor lives on Amber's farm with Farmer Story, Mrs. Story, their two children Max and Lucy, and the family dog Ben. Felix loves living on a farm. There is always plenty to do and lots of people around. In fact, Felix couldn't think of anywhere else in the world that he would rather live. The sun was shining, and Felix was harvesting wheat with his friend Colin the combine harvester, who was big, red, and very hard-working. Colin cut the wheat, then blew the grain out into Felix's trailer. This created huge clouds of dust, and Felix tried hard not to sneeze. When Felix's trailer was full, he went back to the farmyard and tipped the grain into a hopper to dry. Colin finished cutting the wheat and left the straw in nice, neat rows, ready for Felix to start making bales with his big baling machine. Mrs. Story, Max, and Lucy were having a picnic under a tree. They watched Daisy the Digger use her special grab to stack the bales onto Felix's trailer. Ben was also busy playing hide-and-seek with the rabbits. After lunch, Daisy began to unload the straw bales from Felix's trailer. As she was stacking them neatly in the barn, dark clouds started to appear in the sky. "Looks like rain to me," Farmer Story shouted to Felix and Daisy. "We need to get those bales into the barn very quickly." The machines worked as fast as they could, and just as they lifted the last bale into the barn, it began to rain. By tea time it was still raining heavily. Lucy, Max, and their dad joined Felix and Daisy in the barn. "Where's Ben?" Lucy asked Felix. "I don't know," he replied. "I haven't seen him since this morning." "He knows not to go too far away," said Mrs. Story as she came into the barn to avoid the rain. "Put your raincoats on and we'll go and look for him." Daisy and Max went to look in the garden behind the farmhouse where Ben liked to play. "Ben!" shouted Max. But Ben didn't appear. Farmer Story and Felix went up to the field where they had been collecting bales. "Ben!" shouted Felix and Farmer Story, but Ben was nowhere to be seen. Mrs. Story and Lucy went to check the farmhouse, as Ben liked to sleep near the warm stove in the kitchen. But Ben wasn't there either. Everyone met up in Felix's barn. No one had found Ben, and it was getting late. Lucy and Max looked very sad. "Don't worry," said Mrs. Story as they gave them both a big cuddle. "We'll find him." Felix didn't like to see Max and Lucy upset. "Let's think about what we've been doing today," he said brightly. "Maybe then we can work out where Ben is." Everyone began to think. Felix thought about when he had last seen Ben. He remembered seeing him going into the straw barn. He was playing with the rabbits as usual. Suddenly, it all made sense. "That's it," said Felix. "He must be in the straw barn. That's the only place we haven't looked." Everyone rushed to the barn. "Ben! Ben! Ben!" they all shouted, but they couldn't hear a thing. "Shh," whispered Felix. "Let's switch off our engines and listen." When it was quiet, they heard a very faint, muffled bark. "He's behind the bales!" exclaimed Felix. "Quickly, Daisy," Felix shouted. "Start moving the bales out of the way, but be careful." As each bale was moved, Ben's bark got louder and louder until... Woof! Out popped a tired, slightly scruffy, but very happy Ben. Everyone cheered, and Lucy and Max ran to give him a big hug. Ben wagged his tail with delight. "Let's get your coat brushed," Mrs. Story said to Ben as she tickled his ears. "It's full of straw." Later that evening, Felix and Daisy began to restack the bales. "It's a good job you remembered where you last saw Ben," Daisy said. "Yes," replied Felix. "Sometimes it helps to be quiet," he laughed. That night, Ben snuggled down with Felix and was soon snoring gently. Felix sighed as he dropped off to sleep. Thank goodness they'd found Ben. The end. Voiced by Matthew Kerslake with kind permission from Catherine Cannon.